The glass conference room was so cold I could see the faint ghost of my breath. I sat stiffly, my knees pressed together under the table, facing my manager, Brad, and Helen from HR. Brad studied his own hands as if he'd never seen them before, while Helen stared through me with that practiced, neutral expression they must teach in HR training. The air smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and anxiety. When Brad finally slid the single piece of paper across the polished table, the sound was unnaturally loud. My stomach dropped. Termination of employment glared up at me in bold, accusatory font. The stated reason made my throat tighten painfully: lack of experience and strategic foresight. My mind flashed to last month, to the 80-hour weeks, the cold pizza at my desk, the triumphant moment I'd single-handedly saved Project Phoenix from collapse after senior engineers had claimed it was impossible. "Your desk needs to be cleared immediately," Brad said, his voice flat and devoid of the fake camaraderie he'd used for years. "Security will escort you out." Minutes later, a cold, fine drizzle soaked through my thin blouse as I stood on the slick sidewalk, clutching a warping cardboard box that contained my wilted spider plant, my framed college degree, and the Employee of the Month award I'd received just weeks earlier. The 40-story Oratech Tower loomed above me, its countless windows reflecting the gray sky like 1,000 judging eyes. I blinked back tears of pure, hot humiliation, but deep in my chest, something hotter than anger ignited, a fierce, smoldering determination that would, in time, burn their entire carefully constructed world to the ground. 3 days before the firing, I'd been in the break room stirring honey into my chamomile tea, enjoying a rare, quiet moment between back-to-back meetings, when Brad's voice carried from the hallway, clear and unconcerned. "Don't worry, your nephew's spot is secure," he said, his tone unusually cheerful and conspiratorial. "We're making room this week. The Sophia situation gets handled on Friday." My spoon had clattered loudly against the ceramic mug, the sound jarring in the quiet room. I'd pressed myself against the cool, laminate countertop, holding my breath until my lungs burned, praying the gurgling coffee machine would mask the sound of my presence. When his footsteps finally faded toward the plush executive suites, I'd slipped back to my desk in the open-plan office, my hands trembling so badly I could barely type my password. All those late nights, the projects completed ahead of schedule and under budget, the glowing praise from major clients, none of it mattered. I was just an obstacle, a line item on a spreadsheet, someone they were casually clearing for the CEO's nephew, a 22-year-old college dropout who spent his internship scrolling through social media and taking 2-hour business development lunches. The betrayal tasted metallic and sharp, like blood from a freshly bitten cheek, and it lingered for the rest of the day. In my cramped apartment that night, the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic. I stared at the severance check lying on my scuffed coffee table, a pitiful 4 weeks' pay for 2 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and poured-out passion. Rain streaked my window like tears on glass, distorting the bright, indifferent city lights beyond into blurry, beautiful smears. Then I remembered the algorithm, the passion project I'd built during stolen lunch breaks and late, quiet nights, crunching vast sets of public data to identify promising tech startups before they hit the mainstream radar. Brad had called it a cute academic exercise during my last performance review, smugly suggesting I'd focus on real work that impacts the bottom line. Now, that dismissed exercise felt like my only lifeline in a churning sea. My hands shook as I opened my laptop, the blue glow of the screen illuminating my tired, tear-streaked face in the dark room. The numbers in my bank account seemed to mock me, enough for maybe 2 months of rent if I was incredibly careful and ate a lot of rice. I took a deep, shuddering breath, whispered "screw it" to the empty, shadowed room, and transferred almost everything to my trading account. This wasn't just a financial gamble. It was me, Sophia, betting my last dollar on myself when the entire professional world seemed to be shouting that I wasn't good enough. For 3 agonizing weeks, nothing happened. The silence in my apartment was a physical weight, pressing down on me. I refreshed my investment portfolio constantly, the screen's glow a lonely beacon in my dark living room, while I survived on cheap instant noodles that tasted like salt and despair and sent out dozens of job applications that seemed to disappear into a digital void, never to be heard from again. Doubt was a creeping vine, wrapping around my heart in the silent, lonely hours of the night. Maybe Brad was right about me. Maybe I was just an inexperienced kid who'd gotten lucky a few times and had now been rightfully, mercifully put in her place. Then, on an utterly ordinary Tuesday morning while I was mindlessly scrolling through yet another job listing website, my phone, which had been so silent for weeks, started buzzing incessantly with alerts, skittering across the wooden table. A major tech publication had featured Nexus Thread, the tiny, ambitious green data storage startup I'd invested my entire severance in. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped my phone. I fumbled to open my portfolio app. My investment had not just grown, it had tripled. Overnight. I sank to my cold kitchen floor, the linoleum cool against my skin, laughing through tears of relief and vindication, the sound echoing strangely in the empty space. This wasn't luck. My model had worked with terrifying, beautiful accuracy. The very lack of foresight they'd fired me for had just proven to be my greatest, most potent strength. For the first time since the firing, a genuine, powerful hope cut through the bitter ashes of my humiliation, warm and bright. With my new, hard-won capital, I created Sphinx Ventures, an anonymous investment company named for the silent, watchful guardian of secrets who posed riddles to the unworthy. I became a ghost in Orateka's machine, moving through complex financial systems and dark pools without leaving a trace, a digital specter haunting their balance sheets. I remembered every vulnerability they'd casually revealed in meetings, every arrogant confession of cutting corners. The critical manufacturing delays in China they deliberately hid from investors, the key European clients threatening to leave over chronic poor support, the crucial patents they needed for their next-generation product but kept delaying purchase of to fluff up quarterly reports and meet unrealistic targets. I began quietly, methodically investing in their direct competitors and snatching up those very patents through a series of untraceable shell companies spread across different jurisdictions. Each move was coldly calculated and deeply strategic, leveraging my intimate, insider knowledge of their weaknesses against them. I was building leverage brick by invisible brick, constructing a fortress around them without them ever seeing the walls go up. And they had no idea the architect of their growing troubles was the 26-year-old woman they dismissed as inexperienced and disposable just months earlier, a woman who now knew the power of her own mind. My phone buzzed on a rainy afternoon, the vibration loud against the wooden desk. The screen flashed with a number I hadn't seen in weeks. Eleanor, my former mentor at Orateka, the brilliant, no-nonsense engineer who'd patiently taught me everything I knew about the industry and its unspoken rules. Sophia? I heard what they did to you, she said, her voice heavy with a disappointment that felt like a shared burden. It's an outrage. A complete miscarriage of justice. And for what it's worth, they pushed me out right after you left, early retirement package, they called it. A gentle shove out the door. She described a company in moral and operational freefall, employee morale at rock bottom, critical deadlines being missed with alarming frequency, talented people jumping ship weekly like rats from a sinking vessel. They're making one catastrophically bad decision after another, she confided, her voice dropping to a whisper as if someone might be listening. Brad's in way over his head, playing at being an executive, and the board is panicking, but they're too proud to admit it. We agreed she'd share general industry insights and public sentiment, nothing proprietary or confidential, just the honest, public pulse of Orateka's accelerating decline. Suddenly, I wasn't operating in the dark anymore. I had a guide, a trusted voice, leading me through the corporate wilderness I once naively called home. Orateka's response to their rapidly slipping market share and the whispering rumors came swiftly and predictably. They announced a classic, poison pill, strategy designed to make themselves too expensive to acquire by flooding the market with new shares if any investor bought more than 15%. Brad gave an exclusive, triumphant interview to a prominent business journal, boasting about their brilliant defensive maneuver and superior strategic foresight, his words dripping with a confidence I knew was paper-thin. I read his pompous quotes while sipping my morning coffee in my pajamas, a slow, cold smile finally touching my lips. My algorithm had flagged this exact defensive scenario weeks ago, calmly calculating its probable impact on various market sectors and ancillary businesses. While they scrambled to defend their crumbling castle walls, Sphinx had already invested heavily in the supply chain companies and emerging startups that would benefit directly from Orateka's clumsy, predictable defensive posture. Their desperate attempt to save themselves was systematically, inevitably padding my pockets and strengthening my position. They were playing a simple game of checkers, reacting to the immediate threat, while I was playing a complex game of three-dimensional chess, thinking 10 moves ahead on a board they didn't even know existed. It was time to test their defenses, to see how truly desperate and financially strained they'd become beneath the polished surface. Sphinx Ventures sent a deliberately, almost comically lowball offer for Project Phoenix. The very innovation initiative I'd saved from disaster 6 months earlier, the project Brad had shamelessly taken full credit for in his last executive presentation to the board. The offer was insultingly low, about a third of its conservative actual worth, designed specifically to gauge their level of financial desperation and their willingness to sell off core assets. Eleanor reported the board was furious at the audacity, sputtering with indignation in the executive lounge, but also deeply, genuinely nervous. They needed cash after their recent, very public stumbles, and Project Phoenix was becoming a notorious money pit under Brad's clueless, distracted leadership. Brad was personally tasked with uncovering Sphinx's identity, his annual bonus and very job security tied directly to the mission. The beautiful, poetic irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd fired me for supposedly lacking strategic vision was now desperately, frantically hunting the strategist who was systematically and elegantly outmaneuvering him at every single turn. Brad's call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was running a new, complex data set through my models, the hum of my computer accompanying sound. "Just checking in, Sophia," he said with a forced, brittle cheer that didn't hide the underlying, raw stress in his voice. "How's the job hunt going? Any promising leads on the horizon?" I made my voice small and defeated, layering on a convincing note of weary despair, telling him I was taking miserable, mind-numbing freelance data entry jobs to pay bills while I stared at Sphinx's diversified investment portfolio, now worth well over $2 million and growing by the hour. "It's really tough out there," I said, injecting a perfect, pathetic quiver into my voice. "I'm barely making rent each month. It's humbling." He offered me empty, condescending sympathy before hanging up, clearly satisfied and reassured by my supposed failure and continued struggle. The deception felt deeply, profoundly satisfying. He still saw me as the struggling, insignificant junior employee he'd casually discarded, never imagining for a single second that I was the mysterious, formidable force systematically shaking his entire professional world apart at the seams. Sphinx made its boldest, most aggressive move yet. A formal, unsolicited tender offer to purchase a controlling 28% stake in Orateka at a modest 15% premium over the current, battered stock price. The offer letter became instant industry news, a document so brutally honest it was later described as surgical and devastating. It meticulously listed every strategic failure, every missed market opportunity, every major customer complaint and internal warning they'd arrogantly ignored over the past 18 months. It quoted, nearly verbatim, specific concerns and strategic recommendations I'd raised in team meetings that Brad had publicly dismissed as uninformed speculation and a clear lack of big-picture thinking. The document was a masterpiece of corporate shade, a public humiliation holding up an unforgiving mirror to their collective incompetence and hubris. Financial news outlets ran with dramatic stories titled "Mystery Investor Exposes Orateka's Rot" and "Is This the End for Orateka?" Their stock price began its slow, steady, inexorable decline as investor confidence evaporated like morning mist, and the once proud company was now the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. Absolute, palpable chaos erupted inside Orateka's sleek, multi-million-dollar headquarters. Eleanor's texts came rapid-fire throughout the day, painting a vivid picture of disintegration. Emergency board meetings stretching for hours behind soundproof doors, senior executives having screaming matches in the hallways within earshot of horrified junior staff, the CEO's office door slamming so frequently the receptionists jumped at the sound. The atmosphere was thick with a toxic brew of fear and paranoia as senior leadership realized Sphinx knew their business intimately, too intimately, suggesting a deep well of inside information that pointed to a traitor in their midst. Brad looked haunted, a man possessed, pacing between meetings with his phone constantly pressed to his ear, dark circles of exhaustion bruising the skin under his eyes. The board delivered his ultimatum during a tense, emergency video call with remote directors. Uncover Sphinx's identity within 7 days, demonstrating decisive leadership in a crisis, or clean out his desk immediately and don't expect a reference. The hunter was now the hunted, and the clock was ticking loudly, mercilessly toward his professional oblivion. Through Eleanor, I learned the precise details of Brad's 1-week deadline and the substantial financial and personnel resources he'd been allocated for the frantic, last-ditch investigation. I decided to help him fail spectacularly, to ensure his efforts were not just fruitless but actively damaging to his credibility. Using an encrypted, completely anonymous service, I sent him a carefully crafted, perfectly plausible tip suggesting a notoriously aggressive rival CEO, famous for hostile takeovers in our sector, was secretly bankrolling Sphinx's moves through a complex network of offshore accounts. The bait was perfect, playing directly into their existing fears and prejudices. Brad took it immediately and completely, like a starving fish, redirecting his entire investigation team and considerable budget toward this phantom threat, this corporate ghost story. I watched in real time through public filings and industry chatter as he wasted precious days and resources chasing shadows across 3 states, holding tense, pointless meetings with private investigators and forensic accountants, while I continued methodically, quietly acquiring additional blocks of Aura Tech shares through secondary markets. His flailing, public desperation was becoming my most powerful and reliable advantage. Our tender offer gained unstoppable momentum as frustrated institutional shareholders, tired of the endless drama and the steadily declining stock value, began jumping ship in droves, preferring Sphinx's cold, hard cash to Aura Tech's chaotic, leaking vessel. The board, cornered and functionally out of options, formally requested a direct, face-to-face meeting with Sphinx's principal through our high-priced, intimidating attorneys. We agreed to a highly secure video conference with military-grade encryption and strict identity protection protocols. Sitting cross-legged on my living room sofa with sophisticated voice-altering software active and my camera showing only a featureless, dark silhouette, I listened to their nervous introductions and carefully rehearsed appeals, their voices tinny and strained through my headphones. Their chairman practically begged for mercy, his voice cracking with emotion and strain as he detailed their hollow vision for renewed growth and shareholder value. They were negotiating their professional survival, their legacies, their golden parachutes, with the person they deemed expendable months earlier, never suspecting for a single moment the humiliating, poetic truth behind the digital veil. As the lead independent director detailed their convoluted, 5-point recovery plan filled with corporate buzzwords and empty, recycled promises, I finally interrupted, my altered voice a low, digital growl that cut through his presentation. That entire approach sounds fundamentally flawed, I stated calmly, with an authority that silenced the virtual room. It's like building an expensive bridge without first checking the depth and current of the river beneath it. I used the exact, simple, memorable analogy I'd repeatedly used in Aura Tech strategy meetings to critique Brad's poorly planned, data-deficient initiatives, an analogy he had always rolled his eyes at. The silence on their end was immediate and absolute, so profound I could hear someone's nervous, ragged breathing. On the video feed, Brad's head snapped up from his notepad. His eyes widened in dawning, horrific recognition, scanning the shadowed screen as if he could physically see through the digital obscurity. His mouth opened, then closed without a sound, a fish gasping on land. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale, clammy, and visibly shaking. He didn't need to say a word, the horrified, dawning realization in his eyes communicated everything. The ghost haunting their boardrooms, the specter threatening their wealth and status, had a face, a name, and it was mine. He came to my apartment 2 days later, unannounced and uninvited, pounding on my door with a frantic, desperate urgency until I finally opened it, the chain lock still engaged, my body a barrier. "Sophia," he breathed, his body blocking my doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled and his tie hanging loose like a noose. "We can still fix this. You need to stop this madness before you destroy everything we built together." When I didn't respond, just stared calmly, coldly back at him, his desperation curdled into something ugly and threatening, his mask of civility crumbling. "You think you're so clever? The board will never, ever let some inexperienced girl Ho cries when she gets constructive feedback take over $1 billion company," he spat, his face contorted with a mix of sheer anger, naked fear, and utter disbelief. I remained perfectly, utterly calm, my phone recording in my robe pocket, capturing every threat, every plea, every damning, unprofessional admission in crystal clear audio. When he finally stormed off, his shoulders hunched, slamming the stairwell door hard enough to shake the wall in the hallway, I had everything I needed to complete my victory. The table had turned completely, the powerless had become the powerful, and I held all the evidence. I didn't release the recording or even explicitly threaten to. That would have been crude, beneath the new persona I was crafting. Instead, through our official, formal legal channel, I simply informed the board's special committee that Sphinx possessed documented evidence of serious senior leadership misconduct and attempted coercion during good faith acquisition discussions. The implication was clear, potent, and professionally devastating without being explicit: the threat of public scandal, SEC investigations, and personal liability carefully measured and deployed like a strategic weapon. Almost immediately, their legal and financial resistance crumbled to dust. The possibility of public disgrace, regulatory scrutiny, and shattered reputations outweighed everything else, including their colossal, monumental pride. An emergency board meeting was called that same night, stretching into the bleak, early morning hours, the coffee pots running dry. Eleanor texted me the outcome just after midnight, her message beautifully simple and final: CEO gone. Votes unanimous. The kingdom has fallen. The first and largest domino had tipped, starting an irreversible chain reaction that would wipe the slate clean for a new beginning. The collapse was swift, merciless, and entirely of their own making. The CEO was officially ousted at 9 a.m. the next morning via a terse, cowardly press release that cited strategic differences and a mutual desire for new leadership, a lie so transparent it was almost funny. His nephew was escorted from the building by a stone-faced security guard by lunchtime, his personal items unceremoniously dumped into a cardboard box and shipped to him later. Brad was suspended indefinitely pending a full-scale, forensic investigation into his management decisions, his financial approvals, and his inappropriate and damaging contact with a principal shareholder, a scarlet letter on his professional record. The old regime, the exclusive, backslapping boys' club that thought itself untouchable, had imploded under the sheer, staggering weight of its own arrogance, corruption, and stunning operational incompetence. My role had been simple, almost elegant in its simplicity. I had just stopped propping up their failing, rotten structure and let gravity, accountability, and their own bad choices do the rest. They weren't destroyed by me. They were destroyed by the people they had always been, finally being held to account for their actions. A formal, almost pleading letter arrived 2 days later on heavy, cream-colored stationery bearing the embossed Oratech logo, a symbol that once inspired awe in me and now inspired nothing. The remaining, shell-shocked board members respectfully and urgently requested an in-person meeting with Sphinx's principal to discuss a harmonious, constructive, and swift transition of corporate control. The language was obsequious, dripping with a deference and fear they'd never, ever shown me as a loyal, hard-working employee. They were surrendering completely, unconditionally, inviting their conqueror to come claim the throne they could no longer defend or deserve to occupy. I waited 36 long, tense hours, letting their anxiety build and fester, before having my lawyer respond with a single, perfectly crafted sentence that held no room for negotiation or pleasantries. The meeting will be held in the main boardroom tomorrow at 10 a.m. sharp. No honorifics, no small talk, no negotiations, just a cold, hard statement of fact from the new authority in their lives. I walked into Orateka's main lobby alone the next morning, my heartbeat steady and sure, my posture straight. I wore a simple but exquisitely tailored black suit I'd bought with Sphinx's investment earnings, a uniform of my new reality and power. The same young receptionist who'd watched a security guard escort me out months before, her eyes wide with pity, now gaped openly, her jaw practically unhinged, as I passed her desk without a glance or a word, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The massive boardroom fell into an absolute, tomb-like silence when I pushed the heavy double doors open and entered, every head turning in unison. Every face I remembered, the dismissive senior VPs, the condescending directors, the finance people who'd routinely ignored my budget warnings, stared in unified, dumbstruck shock. Brad, present only to hand over transition files, looked physically ill, his skin pale and clammy, his posture utterly defeated. I didn't glance his way, didn't acknowledge his existence in any way. I walked directly to the head of the 20-foot mahogany table, my heels clicking decisively on the polished floor, and took the high-backed leather chair that had always, exclusively been the CEO's domain. I didn't need to say a word, to smile, to gloat. My presence in that chair, at that moment, before these people, said everything that ever needed to be said. The dismissed had returned, not as a victim seeking vengeance, but as the owner, the architect of the future. I let the silence stretch, making deliberate, unhurried eye contact with each stunned, ashen-faced board member before I finally spoke, my voice calm and clear in the tense, thick air of the room. My first official directive, I announced, the words echoing slightly in the silent, cavernous space, is to reinstate Eleanor as Senior Vice President of Head of R&D with full, unrestricted budgetary autonomy and a permanent, voting seat on this board. I paused, letting the weight of that decision, that reversal of fortune, settle heavily upon them. Then I added, my gaze sweeping over them, leaving no one out. Concurrently, we are immediately allocating significant capital and top engineering resources to fully develop, launch, and scale the predictive algorithm this company previously dismissed as unworthy of investment. Uncomfortable murmurs and shifting postures rippled through the room. Some people studied the intricate wood grain of the table, properly and publicly ashamed, unable to meet my gaze. I wasn't there for revenge or petty gloating. I was there to rebuild, to finally nurture the innovation and raw talent they'd systematically stifled and squandered for years in favor of office politics and cronyism. The real, hard work of redemption was beginning, for both the company and, in a way I was only beginning to understand, for me. We initiated standard, by-the-book operational and financial audits across all departments. Routine due diligence for any change in corporate control, but conducted with an unprecedented depth, transparency, and forensic intensity that left no stone unturned. The process, inevitably, uncovered the full, ugly extent of Brad's systematic deception across multiple quarters. Wildly inflated project completion reports, deliberately hidden budget overruns, creatively misrepresented client satisfaction scores, and a tangled web of questionable, cozy vendor relationships that smelled of kickbacks. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulously documented in his own emails and memos, and entirely his own making, requiring no embellishment or fabrication from me. We provided everything to the Internal Audit Committee and the relevant regulatory authorities, letting the ugly, undeniable facts speak for themselves in a court of law and the court of public opinion. His professional and personal downfall wasn't my creation or some elaborate revenge fantasy made real. It was the simple, inevitable result of his own poor choices and profound ethical failures finally seeing the disinfecting, unforgiving light of day. Justice, I realized with a quiet, profound sense of peace, wasn't something I needed to personally deliver with fire and fury. It was something I simply needed to stop preventing from happening, to allow the truth to have its day. Brad appeared in the doorway of my new corner office a week later, a hollowed-out, broken shell of his formerly smug, confident self. The investigation and ensuing legal battles had cost him his reputation, his career prospects, his crumbling marriage, and most of his life savings, leaving him with nothing but regret. Sophia, he whispered, not meeting my eyes, his shoulders slumped in permanent defeat, his once expensive suit now looking baggy and sad. I have nothing left. No one in this entire industry will touch me. Please. I assessed him coolly from across my wide, uncluttered desk, feeling neither the hot rush of anger nor the cold drip of sympathy, just a distant, professional assessment of a damaged asset. I offered him, clearly and without a trace of emotion, his old junior analyst position back. Honest, humble work with a clear, merit-based path forward if he demonstrated genuine competence and humility, but reporting directly to Eleanor, the woman whose expertise and authority he'd always publicly dismissed and privately mocked. The profound humiliation was precisely the point, a necessary, bitter medicine, but the opportunity for a difficult, painful redemption was real. It was the ultimate test of whether his gargantuan pride or his basic, human survival instinct was the stronger force. He accepted, as I knew on some level he must, his pride finally broken on the wheel of consequence. The entire office watched in stunned, weekly silence that first Monday as the man who once ruled through fear, favoritism, and loud, empty boasts now sat silently in the back row of team meetings, taking diligent, copious notes while I led complex, forward-thinking strategic discussions about the company's bright, ambitious future. I never acknowledged his presence beyond the ordinary, minimal professional courtesy required for any employee. There were no gloating smiles, no targeted criticisms in meetings, no public call-outs or subtle reminders of the past, just the same high-performance expectations, the same standards of excellence, I held for every single team member regardless of their history. My ultimate power, I discovered, wasn't in punishing or tormenting him. It was in demonstrating through my every action, my every calm decision, how completely and utterly insignificant he become to my world, my vision, and my future. My professional, polished indifference toward his existence was far more devastating, far more just, than any dramatic, fiery revenge I could have ever engineered. 6 transformative months later, we launched Aura Predict, our stunning new flagship product built entirely around my once dismissed and mocked algorithm, now the beating heart of the company. The launch became the company's most successful in over a decade, beating all Wall Street analyst projections by a breathtaking 60% and sending our rejuvenated, respected stock price soaring to unprecedented, dizzying heights. More importantly, the office culture had fundamentally, permanently transformed. Open collaboration and cross-functional teams replaced suspicious, guarded silos. Data-driven innovation and intellectual curiosity replaced political maneuvering and credit stealing, and mutual respect and shared purpose replaced hierarchical fear and toxic competition. The hallways now buzzed with positive, creative energy from employees who finally felt truly valued, heard, and empowered to do their life's best work. We'd kept most of the original staff, but the soul of the company was completely new, vibrant, resilient, and ethically sound. The place that had once so callously crushed my spirit now thrived, vibrantly and profitably, on the very principles of transparency, merit, and bold innovation they'd fired me for so passionately championing. It was a redemption for us all. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of my office as a spectacular sunset painted the city skyline in brilliant, hopeful hues of gold, orange, and violet, remembering with crystal clarity the devastated, lost young woman sobbing in the cold rain with her pathetic cardboard box just 7 months earlier. That girl had been told repeatedly, explicitly and implicitly, that she wasn't enough, not experienced enough, not strategic enough, not valuable enough. And for one terrible, dark moment, she had almost believed the lies they told her. But here I stood now, in a beautiful, quiet corner office I owned, leading a company I'd saved from its own worst, self-destructive instincts, surrounded by people I genuinely respected and who, in turn, respected me not for my title, but for my vision, my integrity, and my actions. The long, painful journey hadn't ultimately been about vengeance or destruction. It had been about validation, about proving my worth not just to them but, more importantly, to myself. They said I lacked experience. So I went out and bought the entire company to get it. And in doing so, I'd found something infinitely more valuable than revenge or victory. I'd found my own unshakable worth, my own voice, and I had built something beautiful, successful, and ethical that would positively impact lives and shape the industry far longer than any of us would be here. The girl in the rain was gone, her tears dried. The woman in the glass tower had arrived, her future limitless.